Good morning and welcome to the Digital New Deal, where we want to be in the 21st century. I've got really two phenomenal speakers, thought leaders in this space with us today. Michael Woods, who's the CEO, COO of a number of companies. Flash Labs is the one we're going to focus on today. And then David Knight, who's the CEO of Turbine and who is a serial entrepreneur, so he's a dangerous guy. We're really happy to have both of you guys with us today. We want to talk, Michael's in South Korea, one of the most heavily 5G'd countries in the world, a tremendous foundation for our discussion. We want to talk about 5G, we want to talk about broadband for all, we want to talk about how that creates a foundation for the economy that's coming and for more productivity and more opportunities for all of us. So what I'm going to do is turn it over to you, Michael, because you're really a visionary in this field and somebody who's putting all the pieces together. Tell us a little bit about your company and what you see in South Korea.
Sure. Thank you, Norman. And always thank you for all the work that CGLA does for infrastructure and education of policymakers to make sure that they're hopefully getting it right and helping us all out, not just as businesses, but as individuals. It's such an important, activity that you do. So we thank you for that. We're part of Flash Labs here in the United States, which is the IT division for the group here in Korea, a small little car company that some people have heard of called Hyundai. And specifically, we're with Hyundai BS&C, which is Business Solutions and Consulting. Many different divisions and businesses that we represent, but the main one here for today is more on the IoT side, the smart city, the smart factory, all around the data creation that has just exploded and is about to explode exponentially more with the implementation and expansion of 5G throughout the globe. So to your point, here in South Korea, I've been here for 2 weeks now for year-end planning, and also some visits to many of our factories here and some of the things that we've implemented that to set up for the 5G expansion, which is already happening here in South Korea, which I'll go through a little bit, and also go through quite a bit of how far behind the United States has become, not just to South Korea, but to multiple countries and geographies throughout the globe. As an example, we have a company here called Heriot, HERIOT, which simply means the heritage of IoT. And Heriot and Hyundai BS&C have built two 45-story buildings in a geographic area, hamlet, let's call it, called Samsung, SAMSONG. And within those buildings, we've actually created a very smart environment, not just for the building as a whole, but each individual apartment actually has their own private blockchain. So the building has its own open source, and then you have a private blockchain apartment by apartment, which actually is a sequence. When you walk in as the owner, you're the node as the owner, and then you approve any of the other nodes onto that blockchain of yours, your private blockchain. And when you turn on the light, it then has a sequence behind it. I turn on the light, it turns on the TV, it turns on the air conditioner or the heater, depending on the temperature. If my daughters are taking too long a shower, I can automatically adjust how much water usage is being done, and that shower shuts off on them, so I can save money. There's so many different parts to this technology that is just so fantastic, and of course, it's overseen by a blockchain because you're protecting all of that data, you're protecting that network, and you're increasing the speed between all those machines because they're just transacting to each other, right? They're talking to each other for all these sequences. So those are some of the things that are already happening, and it's not just us that's doing it. It's many different companies on the IoT side that have already started to utilize 5G and are setting up their ecosystems to be able to be even more enhanced by 5G, because it's really going to bring a whole new digital world to us, more businesses, et cetera, that David's going to talk about quite a bit. But let me regress just a little bit, and then let me hand it over to David. So all of this proven economic growth that has already happened from 3G to 4G, now to 5G. The GDP increase that has happened there when we went from 3G to 4G, around 2013, 2014, there you had roughly a 15% increase in global GDP, around that number. Then when we got to 4G in 2016, 2017, you had a 27% enhancement to global GDP. And now we're going to 5G, and some of the estimates that we're going to have well better than that 27 could be a third to 40% enhancement in GDP, which is just amazing. The unfortunate thing is that the US has fallen so far behind to where we used to lead in that digital infrastructure. That's the saddest thing for us as an economy, but it's a great thing for a lot of the other developed economies throughout the globe that have become much more competitive to the United States and Europe on that digital space. As an example, when we're going from 4G download speed to 5G download speed, we're roughly here in the US, we're going to go up about 1.8 times in that download speed. But you look at somebody like South Korea, they're going, it's crazy, they're going up 5.3 times in their download speed, and well more than 5 times faster than what we're going to be with our 5G, right? That's just South Korea, where we're also getting beat, and I'll just name them off. The Netherlands is going to be faster. Germany, the UK, Hong Kong, Switzerland, Kuwait, Canada, Taiwan is going to be 4 times faster than us, and the same with Australia. So this is great for the other countries, but it's an embarrassment for the US on a digital plane. And when you think about all of that has happened here in South Korea, it didn't just, all of a sudden they have this whole huge infrastructure. It really started with a global event. They rolled out their pilot when the 2018 Olympics were here, right? Okay. So their 5G pilot happened way back then, 3-4 years ago now, for the Olympic event. Then the government was smart, and they started to sanction all of the different auctioning of the 5G areas, right? As we got into later 2018, early 2019. Then the first launch of the 5G in Seoul was December of 2018. Think about that, how much further they were ahead of us in 2018 to where you look today. In 2019, June, there was 1.6 million 5G subscribers. And then SKT, one of the large telecom companies here, started to really expand in the last 2 years. You went just in the last year from less than 2 million subscribers to almost 10 million subscribers in 1 year, right? Wow. Just into 5G area here. So that kind of growth is, of course, already accelerating the GDP here and unlocking so much IoT potential for smart cities. When you look at the safety side, your smart safety, I don't know if people know this, but there's not one police officer on the highway in South Korea. Why? Because when you're going down the highway, they have IoT devices at every mile station and sensors that see your car, see your license plate, and time you every mile. They don't need police officers to give you a ticket. You're getting a ticket automatically, right? Yeah. So this is just amazing stuff. Think about that. In the United States, if we actually had the same system, how much safer it'd be, right? How much more conscientious drivers would be, because they know they're getting timed and clocked everywhere that they are on the highway, right? How much safer the fleets would be, right? In that as well. Your transportation here is much smarter than we are, right? They already have a huge drone taxi initiative from the government here, and we're so far behind that because they're so much further along in 5G, which is needed for that. Smart grids, smart energy, the environment, the health side. I had my COVID test today before I come back on Thursday, and I got to tell you, the way that they process you through a COVID test from one station to another station, and I'm getting everything automatically on my phone, et cetera, it's lickety split. They're just so far ahead of us. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then lastly, and then I want to hand it off to David. Let's talk about this 5G impact, where we were talking about, the 3G to 4G and now 4G to 5G. They're estimating by 2030 here in South Korea, the furthest along in 5G, you're going to have roughly a $42 billion socioeconomic positive value impact between now and 2030. Now, 10 main industries here, the two biggest are projected to be the automobile and the manufacturing, as you would imagine, which is going to just be amazing. And that whole 5G, to your point earlier, Norm, about broadband for everybody, that 5G is going to filter down into four main areas, which is smart city, which is smart office for productivity, which is smart home, which is basically all of our offices now anyway for productivity, and then over into all the non-urban areas for that broadband for all. So South Korea for sure is an amazing example that, you know, for the Biden administration to talk about. And today, actually, I had a conversation for half an hour with current Ambassador Harris, for our U.S. ambassador here, and we did talk about, you know, cyber threat, because you saw just a day or so ago there, you know, that the U.S. government got hacked again, which was frightening for many of us, and the fact that this 5G is going to make all of that hacking even, or the protection against the hacking, even much more important, and the safety and security of that immutable data that David's firm actually, you know, makes sure that the source of that data that he'll talk about is as safe as can be, so that anytime that you have a hack that injects, right, FDIA, you know, false data injection actions, which is one of the biggest fears of the Department of Defense, every Department of Defense throughout the globe right now, right? The blockchain can protect against that as 5G and IoT really proliferates. So 5G is creating a whole new digital economy, unique qualities to it, and a whole new data economy that's coming. And let me stop there. And David, I know you've got a lot to talk about with 5G.
Yeah, David, you know, Michael was a little depressing. Maybe you can be optimistic.
Well, I will endeavor to do so. So let's start a little farther back. So generally speaking, the evolution of telephony worldwide has been, you know, in 1G, 2G, we're in the analog world. 3G takes us into the digital world. And what that means is the phone calls become digitized, digital audio, and the switching of them becomes digital on the back end. Then we go to 4G, and that essentially layers in TCP/IP, which is the underlying communications fabric that supports the internet. And then we're coming to 5G. So during 4G, we've seen this incredible proliferation of smartphones that kind of came along in lockstep with that. And as 4G has been deployed around the world, we've been able to see the rise of the app economy, which is literally, if you add it all together, is worth about $2 trillion. And that means selling apps, what the apps enable. Most people cannot live without the apps on their phones nowadays. It's an absolutely vital part of their day, and I mean almost by the minute. We all know that. So 5G brings along a whole new set of capabilities. Here in the US, the carriers are doing a lot of television ads saying 5G will give you faster download speeds. Well, there's no doubt about that, and the latency is low. But there's another aspect of 5G that isn't really about your phone. It's the ability to have different data streams that belong, if you will, to different companies, government agencies, in fact, a very large number of them. This is a whole new world. And instead of the app economy, we're now going to move into this whole new thing, which is essentially a data economy. And that's where the data becomes valuable intrinsically. Machines become the users as well as the generators of the data. And this is why we founded a company, Turbine, on this concept that something's got to be in charge of all of this in terms of how you manage the movement of the data between machines, organizations, all sorts of legacy and new systems. And most particularly, how do you monetize that? If you're a city and you want to make money from your infrastructure data, if you're a car company and you want to make money from all that data your cars are, you know, sending out, 5G literally enables that to happen. It is not possible to do it at scale with 4G. So that is a really important thing about 5G. Now, the interesting thing is as 5G is being deployed, and this is worldwide, there's a whole new thing that goes with these new capabilities, that a number of companies are building what could probably be categorized as a bunker. You sit at the base of the cell tower, and it's sort of a mini cloud computing center. They tend to call these fog or vapor computing because that's the wispiness at the edge of a cloud. And this means that computer servers at the cell tower can now manage transactions right there in the neighborhood. You say, well, what's that useful for? Well, some of the things Michael mentioned are about to happen. We're going to have delivery drones flying around neighborhoods, delivering things. We're also going to have drones that are looking at the ground, looking at everything from radar to visual imagery. We're going to be wearing augmented reality glasses that give us displays laid on top of the landscape. It'll be sort of like a first-person shooter video game, except the data will be real. And at the same time, COVID has brought forward a lot of things. For example, about a year ago, various studies showed that at least 2/3 of Americans said, I'm never going to get in a self-driving taxi. Well, now it's flipped entirely. A recent survey shows that about 2/3 of Americans say, I would much rather get in a self-driving taxi. Their fear about that technology has been replaced by the fear of being exposed to COVID by, frankly, a rideshare driver or a taxi driver. So we're going to see those technologies come forward very dramatically. All the big tech firms and automakers are investing in autonomous technology. We also have electric vehicle technology, which is preceding that. All of these things are going to draw tremendous amounts of bandwidth right on the streets, in buildings, outside of buildings, in the sky above the street level, even in other interesting areas like rural areas, on the water, and so on. So I'll tell you briefly what Turbine does. We are providing what's sort of a air traffic control system, so to speak, for all of this data. We are taking data from one machine or a system or a whole company or a government agency, and we contextualize it, meaning we really know a lot about that source. And then we can provide that data to other parties, which could be, a street cleaning robot that's running down your neighborhood. And the number one thing we heard in developing Turbine, which we've heard mostly from large corporations around the world, is, well, I need to know who's getting my data. It's really important to me. I don't want my competitors to get it under most circumstances, but I might want to give it to universities for free because I'm supporting STEM education. I mean, there's a lot of different variables. I want to support NGOs, and I want to monetize my data. So we've had to build a lot of technology to support those things, just like they did in the phone networks when they went to 4G. So what's really interesting about it is that the data itself might go over 5G from one device to another, relayed through the cell tower, but there's still got to be something in charge that worries about the money, worries about liability for the data transmission, and really worries about the integrity of the source. So as Michael mentioned, we've formed a partnership with his company, Flash Labs, so that we can use blockchain to literally validate the source. This is not only important to the corporate world, it's very vital to things like protecting critical infrastructure. So all over the world, governments are extremely worried about a new thing that hasn't been there before in terms of sort of next generation hacking. So hacking originally was, you break into a system and you pull data out or do something to mess with it. Well, now there's a whole new thing, which is false data injection. And what that means is, a great analogy is, you know that in lots of TV shows and movies, there's that sequence when the guys in the movie are trying, like Mission Impossible, they're breaking into a facility, and they always have their hacker, and that person loops the videos so that when they go down the hallway, you don't see them going down the hallway. Well, this is like that, but for data. So they can inject erroneous data into the stream, and whoever's running that system may not even realize it's happening. They're looking for hacks. They're not looking for bad data because it looks legit until it isn't. So what could you do that way? You could tell the floodgates of a dam to open and drench a city below it. You could turn all the lights in a city green at once, which would cause a lot of chaos, obviously, and you could screw around with a power grid, and you can be injecting legit data and then all of a sudden change it. So you can imagine that, you know, the federal agencies in the US plus state and local agencies are worried about this. Corporations, energy operators, very worried about this. So we hope to be able to bring some sanctity to that and say, like, that data, if it's going across the system, we can tell you with a very high amount of confidence that that's the correct data. And this is done through a combination of a lot of logic and blockchain.
Right.
The other thing I want to mention is that all of this movement of the data will enable a whole new data economy. Nobody has really monetized the data from machines at scale yet, but all of these planets are lining up. You've got 5G, you've got artificial intelligence, you've got the Internet of Things. Almost everything there is now is coming with sensors, processors, and connectivity. And this is going to enable whole new revenue sources. Hopefully, whole new companies will be built on this, including ours. And if I was talking to those who've got to make decisions about infrastructure investment, here's the cool part. The cool part is, if you buy anything new now that makes, you know, road grading equipment, asphalt or concrete pavers, cranes, bulldozers, farming equipment, almost anything you can think of, it's just state of the art now from, you know, any of those manufacturers you can think of. So this means they're going to have sensors on them. They're going to leave sensors behind, paved directly into roads. We'll have sensors baked in. So will new bridges, tunnels, rail systems, aviation, waterways, you know, anything to do with local or high-speed rail is all going to have sensors, processors, and connectivity. We'll be chipping away at the issues of how to securitize that as well as making it financially valuable. But the most important thing is that with a big infrastructure investment, all of that's going to show up. It'll make the infrastructure smart.
That's really interesting. I have two questions for you guys. One of them is, you know, this sort of explosion in data. What percentage of the data that we have available now are we actually using or monetizing? It's going to be a really small percentage, right?
Well, I can tell you empirically, and we think we may be about the first people to know this at scale. For about the last year and a half at Turbine, we've been bringing in feeds from cities, counties, states, federal agencies, and a lot of their counterparts around the world. We have about, last count, way over 30,000 of these feeds. Now, one feed could represent all the signal lights in Philadelphia. You know, these are, a feed can be a lot of sensors, machines under one feed. And one thing we've learned is that when you go talk to these agencies, only about 20% of the data on average that they generate ends up in the outside world. And that's being generous, frankly. When you ask them why that is, they say, well, you know, it's expensive and we have old computer systems and we don't have the resources. And obviously there'd be great public benefit as well as commercial benefit to having more of that data out there. And so solving that with new infrastructure and funding for infrastructure will help tremendously get that to be more automated, like as Michael described in Korea, you know, smart stuff on the highways. A tendency is to say, well, we'll deal with that later and keep kicking the can down the road. But we're really at the place where we need to solve this at scale on a nationwide basis. I'll give you a great example of why nationwide is important. Right now, the first time I think we're going to see autonomy besides in localized robots is going to be big rigs, big long haul trucks. There's a almost phenomenon that started already in Europe, and they are ahead of the United States in this regard, called platooning. So platooning is a term where you have a big rig, and then behind it are a whole bunch of other big rigs that are all being guided by the lead big rig. So it's kind of like ducks following the mother, and or a land train, if you will. But they're not connected together physically. They're connected together by sensors and things like radar, LiDAR, and process. So as these things start to move down the landscape, which will be very efficient, especially as the big rigs become electric. The one thing that everybody's starting to notice in that world is that the data that you can get from the environments that the big rigs move through is very inconsistent. If you go from, let's say, I won't name states, but a state might have radar on the roadway that's telling you all about the traffic moving with great resolution. You cross the border into the next state and you're still on the highway, you haven't slowed down or anything. And all of a sudden they just have those, 80-year-old loops of wire in the road that just tell you a piece of metal moved over them. So you just went to very low fidelity, very low reliability. And things like, what's happening with road conditions, what's happening with micro weather along those routes, all of those things are very, very inconsistent when you move from one zone to the next.
So just to interrupt quickly, David, because I think we have to end in a couple of minutes, but one of the things that's horrible about what you just said from my point of view is that because of COVID, all the states and cities, their budgets are under tremendous pressure. So they could actually make the investments that they need to make according to you. It's not possible unless the federal government plays a role, right? I mean, this is a big issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's a to your point, Norm, it's a possible really nice revenue source that David alluded to earlier for those cities and those municipalities, because I don't think most people understand how much data is being created, right, to be monetized. As if you think about it, we now live in a zettabyte world, and most people don't know what a zettabyte is, right?
I do.
A zettabyte, yeah, you do, right? A zettabyte is 1 trillion gigabytes or 1 billion terabytes, which is just an unconscionable amount of data to try to get your hands around. And in 2019 was the first year that within 12 months, the world created more data in less than 1 year than ever existed before the beginning of 2019. And we're going to be faster than that, probably going to be about 10, 11 months that we're going to double all historic data in 2020 before 5G. And now 5G comes out. Think about the data that's being created to be able to be monetized, utilized, optimized, et cetera. You could be possibly doubling historic amount of data, all of the data ever created in a quarter or less with 5G throughout the globe. Think about that monetization potential for municipalities.
No, it's incredible. My question for you guys, just to end it quickly, South Korea's got a very active public sector, right? They've guided this process. The U.S., as far as I can tell, the public sector is completely absent in this whole process. We've got a new government. One of our proposals is that we develop a nationwide 5G system. And listening to David, it's a lot more complicated than just having radios everywhere. You're really going to have to figure out how to put in new kinds of data infrastructure and new kinds of platforms and systems. What do we do? What's the action item for the federal government? What would you tell President-elect Biden if you wanted to get them going in the right direction?
I think it's really easy. They need a better task force, and they need funding for this, and they need a definitive plan coordinated with the cities and the states. Which that's why you're gonna need a whole new task force that actually understands it, not policymakers that are running the task force, technicians, business leaders, and city and municipality leaders. Get them together and create a robust task force to get this done, and realize you don't have a choice on the funding. You need to fund this, otherwise we're just going to get annihilated from the other countries that are already far ahead of us.
Yeah, I think that's the right message. David, do you want to have the last word from Las Vegas, since we just heard from South Korea?
Sure. And in fact, in Las Vegas, we're part of a major effort to create a smart city that will be very, dependent on all the 5G technology. So we probably don't need a national 5G network per se. We need a national 5G plan. And that, the phone companies don't go away or anything like that extreme, but things need to get coordinated. you know, the city and other local governments really need to be brought into the discussion. Maybe, you know, some national infrastructure committee, something like that, that governors are aware of, that mayors are aware of, because this is, you know, politicians are usually not highly, you know, brought up to speed on this technology, so to speak. If they can be shown the benefits and why they're going to, you know, encourage economic growth, public safety, security, you know, protection of our critical infrastructure, and most importantly, just generally improving the quality of life for people. You know, technology has always had that effect, you know, if you go back hundreds of years. And this is really an amazing inflection point where we can actually make that happen.
Yeah. Well, this is great. This has been fantastic. Thanks so much, you guys. I really appreciate you guys taking the time late at night in South Korea, early in the morning in Las Vegas. I look forward to talking to you guys in the future. This is just the beginning of a conversation. So let's see if we can put together something like a national task force and really have an impact. I think it's important. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you guys soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Norm.